Okay, good morning. Can you hear me? Right. I come from the land of PowerPoint, and I'm also a very visual learner. And when I tried to think about talking about my story, I did it in slides. So I'm going to take you through a visual journey, slightly. And I want to just, again, thank all the folks for organizing this panel. And I particularly want to thank Earl Lewis, who I will mention a few times in my presentation, as a mentor and kind of an idol as we work through this. And he's the reason I'm here. And so what I want to talk about today are a couple different things. Oh, hey, there's the sound. And I think we're this DC cohort too. Aren't we all in the DC area? Most of us? Yeah, so we're talking about transferable skills. You don't have to go to DC. There are a lot of opportunities. So I'm going to talk about kind of my personal and professional journey. My professional journey has really had 3 phases, the way I like to think about it. The first phase was academia, which was around, oh wait, I skipped a step. There we go. Let me start with this, my personal and professional commitment. So these are the 3 kind of core values or approaches that I think have influenced my life and my work. The first is a real commitment to equity, social justice, and reproductive justice in particular. And I'll talk about how that's kind of, well, you'll see how that flows through all the work I've done. The second is an interdisciplinary, collaborative, and a hands-on approach. For me, the nature of my education here and the work I've done since has always been interdisciplinary and is about connecting people, ideas, resources, etc. in a way that's very practical and hands-on. And then I would also say the third theme is really about public engagement through interaction, listening, and co-creation. And in the work that I've done, it is always about trying to think about the voices that need to be at the table and how to lift them up. And then it's not just mine, and it's not just the scholars that have come before me, that it is about making sure that the work you do is really reflective of the reality of the communities and the people that you're working with. So then, that's my professional journey. Phase 1 was academia. And I really related a lot to Tracy's story. Trying to feel like, I don't know how I got here either. I grew up in South Dakota. I'm this little kid in South Dakota. My parents started a community college, actually. They have master's degrees, but that's a different kind of academic experience. And so when I ended up at Michigan, it was a whole new world. And I went to a liberal arts school in Minneapolis, in St. Paul, Minnesota, small, different kind of education. When I got to Michigan, it was a whole other thing. And so really kind of learning how you navigate the system, how you navigate your peers, how you navigate with your professors, sometimes well, sometimes not. That's all part of the journey. And I think the other thing I'd say about academia is it really kind of gave me a voice to be able to express the things that are at my core. And so I think being able to talk about these issues, to bring the rigor, the evidence, et cetera, behind it, and the confidence to be able to talk about these things was really one of the key takeaways for me for academia. I then moved into government consulting, and I'll talk about this. It's funny, we were having a conversation last night about how it seems like it's a hustle. That's kind of the idea that people have about consulting. It's true, but I learned how to hustle at Michigan. As a grad student, I hustled every day for 9 years while I was here in both programs, trying to figure out how do you find funding, how do you find the resources, how do you network with the people you need to be able to get your work done. And consulting for me just kind of professionalized it a little bit more. And also, I think, really built on the skills I learned in grad school and took it to another level by focusing on problem solving. We talked about this last night as well. It's like, how do you take this idea, this critical thinking, these other ideas, and turn it into something that's creating real solutions for real life problems. And the third phase is new. As of June 21st of this year, I started a new organization, and so I'm focused on expanding contraceptive access and working through some federal processes, so I'll talk about that a little bit later. If I get that right. Okay. So just generally, I think I talked about some of this. I got interested in history. I did a double major in history and political science. I did a summer research program at the University of Minnesota. I was supposed to be in political science. My instructor got sick, and I ended up doing it in history. And I explored kind of the intersection of race and gender around the 19th Amendment, passage of the 19th Amendment. And I was just really excited about it. And I ended up going to the University of Michigan because of Earl, because of Elsa Barkley Brown, because of Robin Kelly, and just the general kind of reputation of the University of Michigan, but also really the interdisciplinary opportunities attracted me to Michigan as well. I did my doctorate degree, I did my dissertation on historical access to healthcare for African Americans, and what was important to me about my dissertation was that I was able to really document how African American women talked about their sexuality, the right to reproductive health, and that I unfortunately, most of the people that were in my dissertation were not alive, and so it was a lot of white glove work at a variety of libraries looking at microfiche, but I really wanted to include the personal and professional experiences of African American women, African American leaders in the community, healthcare providers, and urban historians. And then I think everybody's talked about these kind of common skills that you learn here around writing, communication, and self-directed learning. I like to add that because that's a whole lot of it, and that's why it took me a little while to get my dissertation done. I was thinking about why I expanded beyond history, because there's a lot to do for the PhD program, but I really made it a point to take advantage of the different opportunities. So I started working at the CRLT, the Center for Research on Learning and Teaching. How many of you have interacted with CRLT? Good. Happy to see that. I volunteered. I went to a workshop, and the person, Sherry, was there, who was, I think, back then she was like, we use the term multicultural. So I was a multicultural consultant, and she did a workshop, and I went up to her afterwards and I said, hey, this is fascinating, I'm really interested, can I do a workshop with you? And then it turned into a paid position after that first workshop. And then I worked there for the rest of my career while I was at Michigan. And what was important is that it's a consulting model. So I would spend some time working in public policy, some time in engineering, some time in math, but I learned kind of about the different cultures, about how to take the skills of training faculty and training GSIs to be able to do different things, no matter what department I was in. So that was really, I think, very useful. I also did a little kind of side gig, I always have side gigs, as a multicultural program officer for the Great Lakes Colleges Association, and I worked with them on recruitment for students of color, managing staff and budgets, et cetera. And I think those two positions taught me about the value of timelines, which you don't always learn when you're working on your PhD, because it sort of goes on. These you had very specific timelines. You had to meet weekly, monthly, et cetera. So that was great. And then I also decided to do an MPH in the School of Public Health after my PhD. I thought about doing a postdoc, but I actually wanted to do the degree so I could get the methodological background and build formal credentials in public health. I knew I wanted to work in health, and so, as Earl said last night, they're more likely to call you when you're Dr. Hart. They're more likely to call me when I was Dr. and PH Hart. So having those letters after my name really were important. And I would say it was so good because it broadened my understanding of how historical contexts inform current perspectives and practices. And I've heard a lot of people talk about that. In the public health degree, it was so clear how my work in reproductive justice is absolutely on everybody's mind today. And that you're seeing some of the same things that have happened historically happen over and over again. Then I moved into government consulting. And so it was kind of a weird transition, but the model from CRLT really helped me think about opening up what kind of career opportunities were available. I looked around online, I found something, I applied. They called me in 30 minutes. They set up an interview with the president of the company, then 2 hours later, which was weird. And the first thing that Larry said to me was, are you, on the phone, are you a historian who can't get a job, or are you really looking at working in history? And I was offended, but then I wasn't, and I said, no, I really am interested in trying to figure out how these intersect and how I work. And they hired me, I went for an interview and they hired me on the spot. And it was an amazing kind of transition career-wise because the organization, and if you're going to go into consulting, think carefully about who you're going to work for. I worked for organizations that were mission-driven and were aligned with my core values. And so being able to address kind of historical and contemporary health inequities was what I was about, is everything I'm about. So those are the kinds of organizations that I've worked with. And it really, what I love about consulting is no day is the same. I worked on, in my 20-year career, I probably directed 40 different projects. I've worked with 20 different agencies. And so it's that diversity, again, but where you just translate those skills to those different departments and different contracts. And I think what I liked about consulting was that you got to partner across different sectors to look at really complex health problems. You got to engage really diverse stakeholders, that's the term we use all the time, stakeholders that not only were they the recipients of kind of the resources, but they were part of the design and the planning and the implementation. And then, just helping government agencies run more effectively was important. Okay. So then government consulting, I don't really have time to talk about a lot of these, but it was about translating your research skills were really important. So in all of the work, like for the National Partnership for Action to End Health Disparities for the Office of Minority Health, we did background research on what historically health disparities have looked like. We did listening sessions across the country. We translated it into an action plan, and then I facilitated a gazillion meetings across the country about how do you, in each community, look at this kind of menu of strategies, figure out what your priority is, and then figure out how you implement some actions that are going to take care of that in your community. So it's really that was like soup to nuts, right, from the beginning to the end of how to move that. Also did some curriculum development and training for community health workers in housing developments, so working directly with folks from the community to work with their peers about how to look at heart disease and how to address asthma in those communities. Let's take that last one. And then this is Earl. So it's funny, karma is really a thing, because Earl said last night that when I sat down and met with him, told him that his life was an imbalance and I didn't want to be him. Well, I kind of turned into him. And I left consulting because people were telling me that my life was an imbalance, and it wasn't. And what had originally started as sort of mission-driven had turned into kind of driven by money. And the intellectual pursuit was gone. It was all operations, which is an important part, but it's not the only thing I wanted to do. So I started my own coalition. And we're small and mighty, but it really is this commitment to reproductive justice for all and commitment to finding access to contraception. It's creating sustainable policy change at the federal level that then gets implemented at state and local levels. And for me, it's combining technical skills, subject matter expertise, intellectual curiosity, and a commitment to social and reproductive justice on a daily basis. So it is like full circle for me. So I love it and I'm happy. And people say that I look like I'm glowing, and I don't have as big of dark circles as I used to. So the skills that were translated, soup to nuts again. I created with my partners the coalition, so I designed the website. We did branding, we educated and got coalition members involved. We do a lot of technical writing about the processes to make sure they understand it and then can communicate that to their constituencies. And then ultimately, it's a temporary organization. I found 3 years of funding, and we are developing evidence-based recommendations to hand over to the government. Well, I can say this now because I don't work for the federal government anymore, for a new administration. That's what we're looking for, one that is more friendly toward reproductive health issues. And then the other thing I'd say is, throughout the career, I had side gigs because it was part of me. It was part of linking the personal and the professional. And so I've always maintained this commitment. So that's just a range of things that I worked. I was a consultant for the Wilder Foundation, Minnesota, renting Section 8 housing. I worked for Planned Parenthood as a consultant. I worked for the Red Cross as an HIV educator. I now still do strategic planning and equity training for foundations. I was a bartender for a while too. That's a different kind of public engagement. But it's really important to me personally and professionally to link those two. And then just ideas on transferable skills. Talk about these, but for me it's about engagement so that the policy and programmatic recommendations that I am making are based on real experience in communities and real experience of employees of the government or other program implementers, that we're developing and harnessing scientific evidence. And Tracy, I love what Tracy said, that her job is sort of harness the resources and give them away. That's what I do. It's not protective. We don't own it. It's everybody. Whatever you do, you want people to use that research to change their programs and their policies. A lot of education of stakeholders, diverse expertise, synergy, and then just building in that public and community engagement. I don't know why I can't figure out how to advance the slides. So, targeted advice. So I turned this presentation in 2 days ago, and I keep changing this in my mind, but I'm going to go with what's here. So one is expand your horizons. And I think we've talked about that a lot, but being able to work or volunteer or get paid to work outside of your department, in your community, nationally, that's incredibly important. And there are so many opportunities to do that within the University of Michigan, as well as the surrounding communities. And do things like, if you're publishing your own peer-reviewed articles, that's great, but be on a peer-review committee. Sit on a national or a federal grant review committee that's looking at research grants. You know, look for those opportunities because they're there, and they'll expand kind of the way you understand how research is created and valued and put out into the community. I would say explore interdisciplinary opportunities. So they're interdisciplinary within the history department even. It's looking into joint programs, certifications, auditing classes. Like, I cannot express how much the combination of my history degree and the MPH made me a better person, but a better professional. I would also say be really creative in how you define your career. You know, look at a range of opportunities. Market yourself and your unique skills. That's the other thing you learn in consulting. Don't be shy. You know, really think about what you bring to the table and be confident in how you talk about that. And when you have job interviews, you know, when I did that random interview, when I was asked if I was a historian and couldn't get a job, I had an answer. And I could talk about why my history degree was important, why my experience at CRLT was important for this new job. And then, I don't have to say it, but network extensively, that's how I've gotten my jobs too. And then lastly, I'd say ask for what you need to move forward. And I realized I learned this from Earl about there's always an answer before now, right? And just ask. People aren't going to give you anything. So it's a matter of asking for it. And the worst that happens is somebody does say no eventually. It's not that hard. And I think the last piece, just from listening to the presentations last night and today, the last thing I'd say is you belong wherever you are. Don't be intimidated. Don't worry about people's titles. When I started doing consulting, I did a meeting really early on for a lot of really high-level folks. And one of the organizers came up during the break and said, you know, it's so funny. When you started, I'm like, who is this little girl that's talking to us? And then he said, but when you opened your mouth, you knew what you were talking about, you know? And like, first of all, we all to say that to me. I felt like I had to stamp like PhD on my forehead, but it didn't matter. I walked to that place like I knew what I was doing and I was confident in moving it forward. And so I think that's one of the biggest lessons is that wherever you are, you belong there and don't feel like you don't. So that's my presentation.